if you're just going to chase money to be rich and wealthy and powerful and all that kind of stuff, you'll never really be happy and you'll never really get where you're going, because there's always going to be someone else with a little bit more and a little bit better. And that doesn't make for a happy life.
You're listening to the She Renovates podcast. You're listening to She Renovates, the podcast for women who want to renovate to create an income and a life they love.
Hello everyone. Today's episode, we have a guest in Max Phelps. Now, Max is a money man. He's a mortgage broker, but he's recently written a book called Spending Fast and Slow. And it really, like, you sort of think most books around money, they travel along the same path. But Max has some interesting ways of thinking around money, and certainly his many years of experience in mortgage broking have informed the theories that he now operates on. And also being one, growing up in a family of 11 is extraordinary and obviously has fed into your thinking around money. And so, Max, what I would like you to do, if it's okay, firstly, I'll welcome you and ask you if you could fill in your background and tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I did grow up in a family with 9 kids, so 11 of us all together. And money was very tight. My dad mostly earned below minimum wage and my mum didn't work. So I was on a mission to not be poor from a young age. Now, initially, I thought the way to do that was to get a degree, get a good job, have a career. And I spent 15 years working for a multinational across 4 different countries. But I also wanted my own family. So I started a family pretty young. And in fact, we had our first baby on the way before I even started my first job out of uni. But the first 11 years or so, we were terrible with money. And I was on a career path. So my income grew. But we found that the more we earned, the more we spent. Now, after 15 years with a multinational, I got out and I became a teacher instead. And so went back to the UK, had a couple of years as a high school maths teacher, loved it, really, really enjoyed the classroom setting and the whole process. But then moved back to Australia and found that my qualification wasn't the right one and I couldn't teach in New South Wales. So I sort of fell into mortgage broking as like a fill-in, I'll do mortgage broking until I can go back to teaching. And of course, the more I sat down with people looking at the details of their finances, the more I found that most people do things the way my wife and I used to do things in our 20s, which is to be very bad with money. And very few people do things the way that we do now, which is to be so much better with money. And so I developed some theories and some practices on coaching people and how to do it. And then started getting more and more into the psychology of why it is that most people are bad with money these days? Why is so many people, the Australian savings rate has been under 2% for over 2 years now. Why is it that we're so bad with money? It's not just anyone. We all seem to be bad. And so the book is really about the stories of people I've met along the way, the normal things that people do that they think are bad, but they are normal. But also how we can turn that around and how we can not do what everyone else does, because we know if we do what everyone else does, we won't save any money. We'll end up broke in retirement, which is, I think, a bad outcome for everyone.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. We're certainly on the page there. So it's interesting you say about, the environment that you grow up in. It's when I was having a conversation with someone recently, and we were talking about business and how some people really sort of excel at business and get very viable very quickly. And for others, it takes years. And I think it's in property as well, that growing up in poverty or in like a very low income environment really does make you keen to achieve financially. Whereas like I didn't grow up in a really poor environment. Like we weren't really that well off, but we always had what we needed. And I think I don't have that sort of drive for money. And I think that makes a difference. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it does, but I think there's also if it's a drive for money just for the sake of money, then that's where I think we've got a problem. That's where it becomes an ego thing, and then you find. I always love the quote, which is the Wolf of Wall Street guy. There was a party that he threw in his mansion after he'd just made done a huge deal and made a load of money, and there was an author there, Joseph Helyar, who wrote the book Catch-22. And it's a tremendously successful book. It's been turned into a TV miniseries, all that kind of stuff. And someone at the party said to Joseph Heller, he said, do you realize that this guy made more money last week than you've made in the 20 years since you wrote Catch-22? And Joseph Heller said, yeah, but I've got one thing that he will never have. And the guy said, what? He said, enough.
Yeah.
And that's quite profound when you think about it. It's what's your level of enough? And if you're just going to chase money to be rich and wealthy and powerful and all that kind of stuff, you'll never really be happy and you'll never really get where you're going, because there's always going to be someone else with a little bit more and a little bit better. And that doesn't make for a happy life. Whereas I'm all about having a happy life whilst at the same time doing the best you can with what you've got.
Well, that is so poignant. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So how do we do it?
So how do we do it? Well, so I also wanted to address, we had a quick discussion before we got on about, are women better at money or worse with money than men? And in my book, I talk about the difference between me as a tight ass and my wife, actually now ex-wife, as a shopaholic. And it can come across that I think I'm good and men are good and women are not good. But in fact, that's not true at all. I grew up in a family with 6 sisters, and I know that in their households, all 6 of my sisters behave in the same way that I do, and they control the money or need to control the money for their family. Otherwise, things get out of control. Whereas it's much more normal to be not very good with money. And the best way of illustrating this is if you go back to the days of our parents or grandparents, and for thousands of years before, money was always physical. We all had cash. And everybody knew that when you got paid, if you just put your pay in your pocket, you'd find that money would just disappear, because there'd be someone at the pub would want a drink and you'd want to get a drink for yourself, and you'd want to buy something on the way home, and you'd want a snack and all these things. And suddenly your money would be disappearing and you'd get home with not enough. And so everyone was told by their parents and in their community that you take your pay packet home, you split it up into, what you need for the bills, and you put it away in little purses, little envelopes, little tin boxes, under the bed, wherever you put it, and then you just walk out the door with a little bit of money. Now, you know that bit of money you walk out the door with is going to be spent on what? Well, it doesn't really matter. It's going to get spent anyway. Whereas now we have this bizarre situation where over the last 50 years, money has become fully digital. Almost none of us see any cash anymore. And we've also adopted this awful practice of, back in the 70s or 80s, we needed a bank account to get paid into. So we'd have our pay land in a bank account, and that bank would then give us a debit card linked to that bank account, or worse still, a credit card. And so now we've all got in the habit of using a card linked to our pay. And that means that we've now done the equivalent of taking our whole pay and putting it in our pocket. So we're now behaving exactly like the people in the past. And they used to say back in the day that the only people who put their whole pay in their pocket were drunks, gamblers, and idiots. And yet that's what most of us do now.
Yeah, exactly.
So does that make us drunks or gamblers or?
It's interesting because it seemed to be perceived to be quite smart to sort of play the credit card system and, have all your pay go. Yeah, I know. And seriously, that's why you're here, Max, because we've got to, challenge the status quo. And often we just go along, like sheep, until we realize the impact of it.
Yeah, but it comes down to the psychology, and there's a brilliant book, which is the title of mine is a play on, which is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And he talks about the way our brain works at 2 different speeds. And so, and it's evolved like this for good reasons. so that most of the decisions we made are made using system one, which is instant, fast. I'm not thinking about the decision, I'm just doing, I'm taking action.
Yeah.
It's a great response to, you don't want to be chased down by a saber-toothed tiger and think, oh, I wonder what my best option might be here. If I ran away, well, this might happen. And if I stood my ground, this might happen. It's like, no. Act now. Whatever action you take will be better than sitting there thinking of it. But then the second way of thinking, system two thinking, is when we actually do take the time to think about, well, what are we going to do with our lives? What are we going to do with our money? How are we going to spend it? And the problem is we think of ourselves as rational, intelligent human beings that can think that way. But the vast majority of our decisions, over 90%, are made instantly without thinking. And as a result of that, when it comes to money, the three problems that we have is, firstly, that there is temptation everywhere. There's always somebody that wants to take our money from us. The second thing is that we have access to money so easily with a debit card, a credit card. We can just tap our cards and we've got the money that we need. And the third thing is that maths is actually quite hard. So trying to keep track of what you're doing minute by minute, day by day is too hard. So we develop our own kind of rules-based system of, well, if it's more than $100, I might think about spending. And a lot of us have this. If we don't set in place these rules, what we find is that typically it's about 10%. So, for example, if you get paid $1,000 for the week, you'll think that anything over $100 is a big decision. If you get paid $10,000 for a month, you'll think anything over $1,000 is a big decision, but all the rest are quite small because you earn plenty of money. And so these sort of shortcuts are ways that we make easy decisions to go, yeah, it should be fine. And we tap our card again, and it should be fine. And we'll tap our card again. And that's why money just disappears so fast.
Yeah. And I guess the absence of budgets as well.
And even budgets have become somewhat meaningless. I ran a budget for the 11 years that we were supposedly managing our money, but we then used a credit card. Now, the problem is the credit card will say yes when the budget says no, but the budget's in a spreadsheet back in the office and the credit card's in my hand right now. And so when you think about what you need right now, you're just thinking, I'm hungry, I'll buy something to eat. You're not thinking, oh, is that going to put me over budget or not? You're just thinking, this is what I need right now. It's that system one thinking. And so what happened was typically 10 months out of 12, the credit card bill would be bigger than it should have been according to the budget. For 2 months, it's fine. The other 10 months, it wasn't. And there was always a reason. And again, even if we looked at our credit card bill or we look at our bank statements, again, the hard work would be to add up all the little things. But the easy thing to do is look for that one big item on the credit card bill and say, oh, well, the electric bill, oh, that's why I spent extra. Oh, it was the car rego, that's why I spent extra. Oh, it was the holidays, that's why I spent extra. Oh, it was someone's birthday, that's why we spent extra. And it wasn't, because all those things were in the budget. It was the little stuff, the $5, $2, $10, $20 that all add up over a period of time. That's what threw us over budget, but we didn't know it at the time because the credit card kept saying yes.
So what's the solution?
The solution is to dramatically change the way that you move money in your life. So where your pay lands is the worst place in the world to have a debit card. So usually we do one of two things. Either keep paying bills from that space and go and create another bank account somewhere else that you can spend from, or create a new place where you can pay your bills from, have your pay land over there, and then continue using your debit card. Now, once you separate out where you get paid from where you spend, you then can do two powerful things. The first thing you can do is choose when to have the money. So lots of us are used to managing money by pay cycle, by fortnight, or by month. But human beings are not very good with that. We work on routines that typically go, Monday to Sunday or Sunday to Saturday. And so it's a week. A week is a good time to manage money. But if your pay lands in one space, you can then give yourself money every single week. You don't need to be now tied to that fortnight or that month. The second thing it does is over time, whether it's through promotions, pay rises, bonuses. We tend to earn more money over time. Now, when a lot of people take the Barefoot Investors advice, for example, have all their money land somewhere and then automate transfers into savings or bills or somewhere else. Well, what you've just done there is fix the amount that you're going to save, but then the amount that you spend over time is variable as your income grows, or if you get bonuses, or if you do overtime. And so you end up spending all of the extra. Whereas when you flip it round the other way, your income is all now somewhere where you cannot touch. It's got no debit, no credit card linked to it. And you give yourself money every week. Well, now you just fix the amount of money you spend. And your pay could go up 10%, but unless you actively change the amount you give yourself week to week, you end up spending the same amount. So over time, you become better and better and better with money, as opposed to at the moment, and what happened to me in my 20s, you get worse and worse and worse over time as you earn more money. So that's the first thing, is to switch things around.
So let's say you're in a relationship and both of you are not on the same page. How do you deal with that?
Well, there's always divorce, but and couples have separated over money before. And there's a story of Vanessa and Jason where she was actually the one who was great with money and he was terrible, and that was one of the things that caused them to split in the end. She just felt like they were never getting ahead. But you have to get on the same page. And the way that I found to do that is whenever you have any kind of budget or whenever you have any kind of controls in place, if you just control the money without looking at why and where you're going and what you're going to do instead, then you just feel like you're being tight. So what I find works best is to start with goals. And we look at 1 to 2 years. What do we want to do in the next 1 to 2 years? Do we want to, go on holiday somewhere? Do we want to buy a new car? Do we have an event coming up? And break down the goals for the 1 to 2 years, 3 to 10 years, when you say, oh, we're going to have a nice holiday every few years and a local holidays in the other time. We want to have babies. We want to have kids. We want to put kids through school. All those things, when you start to look at your life in those terms, and then you look at the 10 years plus, and that's when you start to think, oh, well, in 10 years plus, I have to start thinking, well, do I want to work forever? Would I like to retire? And if I want to retire, how do I do that? And do I need to start planning for that? Now, once you set your goals in place across your family, your home, your investments, your career, your holidays, your celebrations, other big things, once you put that into perspective, then it's much easier to see, well, if I want all these things with my life, then I need to spend less week to week, month to month, so that I can have all of those other things that I actually really, really want. And as a couple, it's much better to get on the same page at that level before we start talking about who's going to get the $50 and who's going to get the $100, because that's the little stuff that's too easy to fight over. So you get the big picture right. And then in any relationship, one of you will be better than the other. And the one who's the worst with money, in my opinion, is the one who should be given the most freedom to spend, which is counterintuitive, but it works. And it's worked for multiple years. My wife and I were together for another 20 years after we sorted things out. And she just knew that this was the budget, but she had all the money for our weekly spend and I had a tiny amount. By the way, I mentioned weekly. Weekly is the best for like the routine, groceries, coffee, lunches, all the things we do every single week. But then there's the things we don't do every week, like getting our hair done or going away for the weekend or buying gifts or buying clothes. We don't do them every week. And what we found is that having that money once a month on the first of the month is the best way to manage that. And it gives you a big lump of money to then go, oh, we've got some money. And you can be a bit frivolous for that first few days of the month. But she controlled all of that because I'm a tight ass. I didn't want to spend money on that. If I needed some clothes, I'd tell her I needed clothes and she'd buy me what she thought I needed. And if I didn't have to go shopping, that made me happy because I'm a tight ass and I don't like spending money and I'd rather not see the price ticket. But once you have that separation, go on, yeah.
It's really interesting so something I learned from you that I have since seen in action is the fact that someone that's a real tight ass, it actually hurts them to spend money.
Yeah, painful.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting And as a reformed tight ass, I sort of remember that. But so we have our house is in a strata building. And there's one of the owners is the typical, he's an investor as well, so he's not an owner-occupier. And I've actually seen that in action. He actually gets distraught if there is money being spent that he doesn't think should be being spent. And I've had not a lot of time for him because I just find it so irritating. But since I learnt that from you, I thought, actually, I can see it in action and it's amazing. Yeah.
And the funny thing about that is that once we set up a plan, for example, so that, all the money lands in one place and we pay all the bills from there. Now, I've mentioned that groceries is in the weekly because groceries is absolutely 100% not a bill. There's no system on earth yet capable of automatically getting the perfectly priced right amount of groceries in our cupboards at home and paying for that automatically. It doesn't exist yet. We have to go online or into a supermarket and make choices with that part of our brain that's going to make quick choices and go, oh, I will have the fancy cut of meat and I will have the snacks because I'm hungry and I will buy all this other stuff that perhaps we didn't need. And so groceries goes in that discretionary spending. But once we've got all of the bills set aside, and then we've got discretionary spending, which I always split in a couple each. How much they get each is completely dependent on their personalities. And I'll give you, these are real figures. So up until we separated, my wife would get $430 per week to cover groceries, entertainment, and all those other things. Bearing in mind, we're on good incomes and got lots of assets. And then she would get another $1,800 per month to just blow on whatever. And in addition to that, we had holiday funds. Now, she got that to look after. Me, as a tight ass, I got $50 a fortnight. That's it.
Oh, my gosh.
Okay.
What did you spend it on?
Honestly, I spent most of it on fast food and snacks. And so sometimes I would literally buy my wife flowers just so that I didn't spend it on fast food. It was a way of dieting for me, which is kind of crazy because I had the budget and I knew I'd spend it. But also when it runs out, you stop spending. And so for me, I would stop spending and then I'd find it would go 6 weeks to go past and I would spend nothing. And suddenly I've got like $150 in my account from a $50 a fortnight budget. My wife, on the other hand, the great thing about that is I had my money that I could spend and I spent next to nothing. She had the money that she could control and spend, but I couldn't ask her questions about what things cost and what it was on because the budget was set. And so that calmed me as a tight ass to know that if I multiplied her weekly by 52 and I multiplied her monthly by 12, I knew exactly what she was going to spend. What it was on and what one item cost didn't matter anymore. All the arguments were gone. Whereas what used to happen was the credit card bill would come in a bit bigger than normal. And I'd start looking at going, I see it, you've got a lovely jumper there, how much did that cost? It'd always be, and then she would, she'd hide things in the wardrobe and lie, and she'd get her hair done and pay some in cash and some on card. So when I saw the card, I didn't see quite how much she spent. All these little tricks because we'd have an argument. All those arguments stopped once we had budgets. And that was all she could access. So, and that meant that when her money ran out for the week, stop spending. When the money ran out for the month, you've still got the weekly money, but when that runs out, stop spending. And it meant that she wasn't then dipping into the holiday savings or the savings for a car or the investment property savings. So that just meant that I could completely calm down. But also she had her own autonomy and was free to spend on whatever she wanted.
So you've got a bit of a theory about weekly as opposed to monthly.
Yeah. Again, I've mentioned that a couple of times. Is we all have a weekly routine, and most of us do grocery shopping weekly. And so having that money land every week. So there's an interesting study, and honestly, I couldn't put it in the book because I read about it years ago and I could not find it again when I searched. I literally couldn't find it. But I know I read it, and so I'm going to talk to it now. And the study was done amongst a group of students, and I'm going to approximate the numbers. But the way it was worked was one group were given $1,000 to last a month. The other group were given $250 a week for 4 weeks. Now, $250 a week is $1,000 for the month. $1,000 for the month should be the same. Now, what happened is, well, I was going to say, what do you think might have happened, by the way? So,
Well, I have heard this story, and that's what I was referring to. But I was thinking when you mentioned it that the people with the $1,000 would have had more at the end of them, like it would have lasted better.
yeah, but it's actually the reverse was true. People who get paid monthly typically run out in week 3, and every single one of the participants had no money at the end of the study. And most of them reported being stressed about money, because when you run out a week early, because typically what would happen is that they see $1,000 and think, oh, well, I can do lots in the first week. Second week, you're going, well, I can't seem to do quite as much. By the third week, you're going, Jesus, I've only got enough to last this week. And then the fourth week, you go, I've got no money. And for those that are paid monthly, they know the pain of the 5-week month. And they do happen 4 a year. Whereas the group that got paid money weekly found it was difficult in the first week. And also they didn't like to run out of money. And so they learned to keep a little bit back. In other words, they didn't see zero as their zero line. They saw maybe 20 or 30 bucks as their zero line. So they had some for emergencies. And every single one of the participants had money left over at the end of the study, because they'd all learned that lesson of I've got to keep, that 20 or 30 bucks just in case. And to be honest, even when I did run out of money, I've always got a $50 note tucked in my key ring, which I often forget is there. And I've just been reminded by the conversation, just in case. But it's really hard to get into and really awkward. And I know that I shouldn't be doing it. It's a crisp $50 note that I know I shouldn't break. So it's there in real emergencies, but most things are not. We have very few emergencies in our lives these days.
Absolutely. So let's just recap. So firstly, don't get your pay paid in to an account that you have access to, like
not even a bank account. Not even a bank account, not even the same bank.
Okay, so don't have it into the same bank so that it's hard to get to. And the second point was setting your goals, setting financial goals. So you're, particularly as a couple, so that you have an objective for how you manage your money, so that you've got goals that will draw you forward and make it not seem like a sacrifice.
Correct.
Third one is budget for expenses monthly, but discretionary weekly. Did I get that right?
Yeah. So we call anything that's got the characteristics of a bill, which is something you can't really, you're going to pay it. The electric bill obviously is an obvious one, but we know we're probably going to have to pay to get the car fixed at some point. We know we might have to see a doctor. So we put contingencies in there for those things, because when they happen, we've got to spend that money. Whereas groceries and other things is discretion. We get to choose. Do we spend more on coffee, less on lunches, more on going out for the weekend, or more somewhere else? So but then there's a routine which we do weekly, and then there's the non-routine which we do monthly, which we call the fun account. It sort of approximates to splurge in the vernacular of the Barefoot Investor, but he lumps holidays in with that, and I don't. Holidays are so special psychologically that we need a break from work. We need to get away. If you look back at the last 10 years of your life, you're remembering the holidays you took and the breaks you took, not the week to week, month to month. So we love holidays to be in the sort of the bills environment, along with proper savings, long-term savings, in that one environment with one bank, and then your weekly and your monthly with your spending bank. And that's the one you have card access to. And that's the one when you jump online into your app, your web, your on your phone, is that you can only see those two. You can't see the others. And so you dip between the two, but you don't dip into the other accounts when you do run, which happens.
Yeah. So you recommend separate accounts for different purposes, a bit like Profit First.
Absolutely. So Profit First is Michael Michalowicz. He's brilliant. I actually saw him present last year, and he says almost identical things to me. And I even asked him the question. I said, I recommend the same things for people in their personal lives that you recommend for businesses. I said, but what about credit cards? He said, don't have them. Because a small business with a credit card we've got the points, and I've racked up loads of points with my credit card, my business credit card. I'm now using them, but I've also stopped using the credit card since I met with Michael, because the credit cards, they say yes to things without looking at the budget. Whereas if you've got a budget to spend a certain amount of money, well, then that's your budget to spend on that stuff. And if you spent it, you've spent it, wait till next month. Whereas a credit card will say yes when you can't. So yeah, Michael McCulloch's actually absolutely, and pay yourself first is, he talks about sort of putting your profit aside first, which is like putting your savings aside first, and then you divvy up what's left over into the buckets that work.
Amazing. Yeah.
And we've got a web app as well, app.goldeneggs.info. And it works together with the book to kind of go, here's how you do a budget where you put all your bills in the bills account and you put all of your weekly spending in this one and your other things in the other bits. But it defaults. So I want to see 50% of your income going towards your rent and your mortgage. So if you've got your own home, it goes towards the mortgage. If you're renting and you're paying 30% of your income on rent, then the other 20% goes to savings. So 50% goes to that. And then you have to make the other 50% last for buying cars, taking holidays, having some fun, and paying all your bills and having money week to week. And when you try and fit it into that structure, you then find that you're always great at saving. And
amazing.
You pay off really fast.
Okay, I think that's a really sound structure, and I'm hoping that a lot of our community are listening to this because, I think we could all get better with money. I think I declared that I used to be a tight ass. I'm not anymore. Right. But I know that there are a lot of people that do need to build capacity, and by being smart with the money you earn, it makes sense. So is there anything you want to add before we wind it up?
Yeah, so I've just got one more thing apart from accessing through the web app, is that the book Spending Fast and Slow is something that I tend to give away rather than sell. So if any of your community is interested in getting a copy, what we can do is share that. We've got a link where if they just pay the postage, we will send them a physical copy of the book. And if they want it autographed, I do those too. But if they'd like a copy of the book, I'd rather they have it, learn from it, and implement the structures, because it's a very pragmatic book, than think that I'm just out here pushing my book. Of course, if they want to jump online and download it for Kindle or whatever, totally fine. But if they'd like a copy, then we can make the link available to you. That's
really generous. Thanks, Max. And we will definitely make sure that gets out there so that anyone that does want one, and I'll be first cab off the rank because, it's amazing. So thank you for being our guest. Now, if anyone wants to just connect with you, are you open to having the odd email?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, firstly, I will just let you know I do run a nice business that I have lots of staff members, one of whom answers or looks at all my emails. So I don't look at emails unless I'm asked to. So if it's an email that's asking for a book or something, then my team will deal with that. If it's asking to speak to me personally or to get more information, then that might get filtered back to me.
Brilliant. And you're on social media as well. So we'll
and it's easy, but Team Max, so double M in the middle, teammax@goldeneggs.info. I'm happy to take emails on that address. And if there's questions, I'll probably answer them. But if my team can answer the questions, they'll normally do it for me. So I'm freed up to do fun stuff like chatting to you and trying to help people rather than just trying to flog product.
Thanks so much, Max.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it.
This is the She Renovates podcast. To discover how to harness the power of renovating, check out theschoolofrenovating.com.